Do you remember when they told you you won't understand love until you have a child? I remember the birth of my son and truly feeling love hugely for the first time. And as my son got older and that relationship grew, I understood what people were saying. I have lost my son. My son died in 2016. And maybe you are feeling that kind of pain. And if I said to you, you can smile again, how does that make you feel? Do you immediately get irritated, or does it bring you hope? I know that in my journey of grief, I have often felt irritated by positive things that people would say. Your pain is unimaginable to others, and it is your pain. Even though I have experienced grief, your grief is your pain. And so can you take a moment, and even if you are slightly irritated by this, you will smile again, can you take a moment and dig deep and find some hope that you can smile again? My name's Christy Bundukumara. I'm a psychiatric nurse practitioner, but my real experience comes from experiencing grief. I have lost 3 children and my husband over the course of 20 years. And I have experienced prolonged medical complication that ended in death to a sudden dying in their sleep. All of it is different. All of it is pain. I am here to guide you on this journey of finding hope, finding that smile, finding joy. If I am real and authentic with you, I can tell you that just yesterday, I sat in my daughter's room and cried. But I also called my childhood best friend and we laughed. Both can be true. You can find times to smile, joy. And here is my nugget of wisdom to you, is finding the balance in that. Many people think, or maybe you think, that the expectation is to get over this pain. And you may never get over the pain, but you can smile again. You can find joy. I lost my first son in 2005 in the midst of raising my children in a drowning accident. 11 years later, I lost my second son, Reggie. And then 5 years after that, my daughter, Maya. And 3 years after that, my husband. And one of the things that I have learned and I am passionate about is that you must feel the pain. If you are feeling the pain in a healthy way, the intensity and frequency in which you have to feel that pain will decrease. But if you are feeling that pain as a weight that is enmeshed with everything else in your life, you will experience depression. You will experience anxiety. And honestly, I have done the very best that I can in working through my grief, and I still have moments of depression and anxiety. So here's my nugget of wisdom. Finding balance between grace and empowering yourself, right? So, oftentimes we're trying to motivate or empower ourselves to get through, work through it, be better, but we don't give ourselves grace. Or maybe we are waddling in this pain and we deserve to feel this pain. We deserve this depression that it is bringing on our body. And we don't give ourselves either grace or empowerment. So here's the balance. When I say give yourself grace, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Like a peace, an understanding, right? That this is difficult. It is likely the most difficult thing that you will ever go through. So in that, it is super important not to beat yourself up, right? I teach what's called the Mentally Strong Method, and we put things in different categories. And grief is a category, and trauma is a category, and negative self-talk is a category. And if you are giving yourself grace, that means kindness to yourself. That doesn't mean beating yourself up, saying those negative things. Grace also means self-love. And we have such a hard time with self-love. But taking that time to learn to love yourself. Grace also means forgiveness. And ultimately, if you are giving yourself grace, there is a calmness of your spirit. Now, I can tell you my journey has not been all, grace and forgiveness and calmness. Absolutely not. But to empower ourselves, remember I was talking about the balance between grace and empowerment. When I think of empowering myself, I think about, okay, I know I'm not supposed to beat myself up, but what am I supposed to do? I'm supposed to learn to talk gently to myself, kind to myself. I learn to improve myself, self-improvement. I talk about the 5 selves in several other videos, but self-improvement, like learning to be stronger, mentally stronger, physically stronger, emotionally stronger, and be real in that grief. That is self-improvement. It is not pushing it aside and I'm just gonna push through, I can do this, right? Like self-improvement is actually learning how to process that grief so that we can believe in ourselves. We can speak kindly of ourselves. And then we can self-love. What is part of self-love is learning to take care of yourself, wanting to take care of yourself, and then learning to take care of yourself. After my daughter Maya died, I was turning 50, and I realized I'm almost 50 years old, and I don't even know what fills my cup. I raised 7 children. I took care of my husband. Like, it was always about caring for other people. And so I took time during that year. What actually fills my cup? What makes me happy? That is part of self-care. That creates and fosters self-love, right? That balance between grace and empowering yourself. There is some work to be done here. Forgiveness. Now, many of you, part of that negative self-talk is what you say to yourself about what happened. If I would have done this, I wish I did this. We have to forgive ourselves. It will be healthier if we could forgive maybe other people if there was someone else to blame. I know I've spoken to many mothers who have lost a child to drunk driving. It was someone else's fault. I have a friend who lost her child in a medical error. And so forgiveness is part of that grace, but especially to yourself. For example, the day that my son died, he was having trouble breathing, and I didn't take him to the emergency room. He had lots of medical complications. He had oxygen here. He had been in this state before, and I waited too long. Now, as I've worked through this grief and separated the grief from the trauma and started speaking kindly to myself and worked out the spiritual conflict, I don't believe that my choice would have made a difference in the timing of his death. But I had to work through that process of forgiveness of myself. That is grace. But when I say the balance between grace and empowerment, it is empowering is taking some action. I had to really work through spiritual conflict. Why did God allow this to happen? And ultimately, there is a peace or a calmness in grace, which I empower you. I am a guide to helping you in self-regulation, taking personal responsibility for all of those feelings that are going on inside of you. They are likely not calm and peaceful. And I stand here today very bold in this calmness and peace. But just yesterday in my controlled grief, I wasn't calm. I was crying and still digging up and working through some anger. I wish there was just something that could happen and the pain would go away. But can you dig deep for some mental strength, some joy somewhere, and learn to empower yourself, right? We're gonna have grace for ourselves. We're not gonna beat ourselves up. We're gonna have self-love. We are gonna forgive ourselves. We're gonna find calm and peace. But we are gonna do that through empowering ourselves with self-improvement, self-care, working through your spiritual self, self-regulation. And the fifth self is self-movement. You know, I talk about in other videos that grief and trauma need to be separated, that trauma needs to be processed and moved out of the body, where grief is held closely and cherished. So I have a few questions from my viewers. My son died of aggressive cancer within 1 month of diagnosis. He was 41 years old, and I feel like I'm supposed to be happy that I had so much time. And I understand that. One of the things that I realized as I was going through my own grief journey, and my daughter was 21, my son was 17, my other son was 13. So they were on the younger side. But I realized that almost everyone, 50 and younger, who dies has a parent out there grieving the loss of the child. It is out of order. And to deny yourself the heaviness and the difficulty of this feeling is not fair to you, is not giving yourself grace and self-love. So let's take a moment and think about for yourself, what do you need to do? Now, I teach a grief intensive where I bring people in for a week and we go through the Mentally Strong method and we learn, you know, what's impacting the pain of this grief, and you know, being able to feel the pain of grief without feeling the trauma of it, without talking negatively to ourselves, while working through the spiritual conflict, right? It's complicated. And this, when I read grief theories, I'm like, this is not accurate. This is not, you know, nice little stages that we go through, especially in what I call traumatic grief. And losing a child is traumatic grief. So you can do this, and find that empowerment within, and give yourself grace that this is extremely painful for you. Next question. I do find myself smiling, but then I feel guilty. I know that that's stupid, but it's real. It's how I feel. I am so proud of you for finding that smile. I'm also proud of you for being insightful and authentic in, yeah, I'm finding my smile, but then I, you know, immediately feel overwhelmed with guilt. When you find that smile and that guilt starts to creep in, I want you to replace guilt with grace. You deserve to smile, but then I also want you to take some time once you're alone, or you know, when you're going through your meditation or your prayer, and just acknowledge that guilt. Where is that guilt coming from? And is it serving you? Is it what your child would want, right? Let's think about where our children are and their love for us. Would they want us to feel guilty? I'm not saying you don't identify it when it comes up. You do. But I want you to try to replace guilt with grace, forgiveness. Remember I told you about the day that my son died and he was having trouble breathing? Yes, that is guilt. And I have to process that as a type of trauma. But if I keep letting that guilt come up, then I'm feeding into the negative. I'm not giving myself grace, right? So every time that guilt comes up, replace it with grace. Last question. I lost my youngest son at age 22 while he was drinking and driving, so it was his fault. I struggle with lots of guilt, and I currently continue to struggle with my relationship with my other adult sons. Whew, this is more than grief. So when I teach the Mentally Strong method, which you can click the link below and learn what that is and how it helps with grief. Grief is part of the equation here, but there's so many other things. right? And so the Mentally Strong Method has 10 different categories because you do different things for different categories. You do something different for your spiritual conflict than you do for your grief. Grief and trauma often get enmeshed. And I talk about this in a lot of my other videos. And what you have to do, so this event was very traumatic for you. There's likely a lot of negative self-talk and guilt, and how your adult sons fit into that equation is, very personal to your story. But what we do in the Mentally Strong Method is we begin to separate that grief and trauma. And there's so much more to your story than just grief. And so I challenge you, empower you, try to guide you in learning the Mentally Strong Method so that you can see what are the different things that I need to work through to find that smile again. So I talked a little bit about the 5 selves. Watch this video series that talks about the 5 selves. 5 selves are how we take care of ourselves so we can be mentally strong.